World building is a part of nearly all media that has a proper world and narrative to tell. If a piece of media gets you to think about the world outside of the narrative being followed, then that is world building you have likely enjoyed. If you have enjoyed exploring the worlds of Dune, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Halo, or Warhammer, anything with those that are not explicitly telling you about things purely for the story is world building to flesh out that world. But for video games, unlike other media that create worlds for fans of it to explore or ponder, have a mixed reputation. If a game starts off with lore dumping about the characters or the world without giving a reason to get more interested in it, then chances are that information is just going to be ignored. So many games I play through never feel convincing when it comes to the world and its connected lore. The game may look accurate to what the developers wanted, such as a sci-fi, fantasy, realistic, historic, alternate history, or post-apocalypse game. The environment may look detailed, but has the problem of not feeling like a lived-in place and just appears to be constructed for the player. Even with lore, whether it be audio logs or textury, typically does not improve that even if it were to feel convincing in that world. If the world itself already feels artificial, then any added lore will not fix that. Why is a convincing game world and its lore so hard to make? Video games, unlike other forms of media such as books, comics, TV shows, and movies, struggle to convince the audience of the characters and world due to a lot of factors, but the first and largest point is investment. Why should a player care about the characters, let alone the world and things going on in it? If the game does not give any reasons beyond the obvious to care about the characters and world, then players are not really going to invest time into learning more about what's going on. Immediately upon the start of the game, there are two easier ways to have players begin to gain interest beyond the immediate gameplay. First is to either have likable characters where as the game goes along, any lore given to them will actually be listened to instead of being ignored. The second is to have a mystery that will hook the player into wanting to solve it. In turn, as long as the lore is relevant to what they are looking for, then that world building and lore will not be ignored. When it comes to a player becoming more invested in characters of that world, how should that character be handled? What should a character have personality, opinion, and moral-wise? Creating a character which is flawless or near flawless, such as Superman being the shining example of a good person, can feel artificial because no person is flawless in any aspect. Making a character have flaws yet approachable, not just in how they think but how they act as well, is a good way of handling new characters. A lot of games have characters where you cannot avoid them as they are a teammate or have some type of other important relationship to the player character, which is not a bad thing, but if not properly introduced without the awkward hurdles of two already established characters acting like they are meeting someone new. How often do players just give in to listening to what that character has to say, even if they are not really interested because they do not have a choice in the matter? When it comes to relationships like this between already established characters, the best way for the player to become more comfortable and potentially interested in wanting to learn more about that character is seeing them interact with a player character or another character in an approachable and likable manner, even with the flaws. A game can still get a player invested with mysteries even without other characters. What that mystery is and when it hooks the player can range from the very beginning to surely into the game's runtime to make sure it does not lose them too soon. What that mystery includes can be an unknown or unexpected death of a character that you have yet to learn more about, a world-altering event and what that means to the player, goals of the enemies you encounter, a civilization or society you encounter, whether it be still active or abandoned, and any stage of ruin. No matter the context of the mystery, when a game gets the player to think about what has happened or is actively happening in a logical sense where any additional context only builds onto what has already been given. If a mystery gives more context but is contradicting or confusing in which the player can see potential holes in the logic, then that interest may fall apart rather quickly. That is where something everyone can agree upon is quality. It's always better to have a smaller and more fleshed out world that a player can explore over a big open world that is much more sparse in detail. That world size is subjective to every game where it may just be a small local area such as a village, town, dungeon, or base, and so forth. It can still be larger to a whole region, but once a world is expanded further, such as a continent or full world, is where the quality of the world building can decline, ironically. Even with game sequels to expand on the previous game's world building, can still have the same problem with larger worlds because of the sparse detail. How many games have these large open worlds but often feel artificial due to the lack of detail and logic for that world? Which does not include locations such as a town or dungeon that may not include proper lore at all. Lore of the world should not be a chore to dig through. It should complement what is already there and add on to it which respects the player and their time. The lore should be something the player is given pieces of throughout the story and in between the next section of a story. A player should be able to find lore whether it be in text or audio logs, which expands upon what is happening and, depending on the lore, give more pieces to the lore puzzle that can be easily fit together. If lore is convoluted and or confusing, then players that could have been interested may not bother to learn more because of it not being enjoyable instead of it being fun or interesting to do as a part of the game. But no matter the lore or size of the world, if it's not logical, then it will just feel artificial. The quality of the world also heavily relies on the logic of that world as well, and what it's inspired by. If something is built by humans of the same or close enough era, no matter the genre unless otherwise specified, then overall architecture, buildings, vehicles, and technology should follow the logic of that world. How often does a game, if it's set in the modern day, have something absurd which clashes with the logic of reality? That modern day time frame with its architecture, vehicles, and technology, in turn taking the player out of the experience and not seeing it as a possible alternative world, but just a game world built for the player and nothing else. The quality of that world building will come along with the intentionality of writing characters, the setting, themes, plot, and the world are the backbone of quality for the overall world building. Only one of these aspects has to be weak for the rest to be discounted. If a world starts to take the player's interest for granted, whether it be nonsense level design, clear holes in the plot or world lore, or lack of proper details for such things brought up in the world, feeling like it was only included to push a story forward, such as a poorly written side character's backstory or questline that should have had more of an impact on the player and the world. No matter what character it is, from the player to the main or side characters, should be interesting and enjoyable to interact with. There is a distinction between actual characters and just NPCs in a world, where not every NPC has to be a developed character with a detailed personality and backstory. They can just be a part of the world for additional detail and to have it feel more alive. This can be the same mindset like in real life, where you're not going to be interacting and talking with everyone you see. A character that the player will thoroughly interact with should have a logical backstory on why they are now around the player, even if it was by coincidence, because of a plot situation, and also including any relevant characters they may have some type of relationship with. That character should have clear enough strengths, not just in physical skill, but mentally as well, which could be them not being affected as harshly as others when it comes to negative interactions. While on the other side, they should have clearly defined weaknesses such as flaws and fears. The character should have clearly understood goals, even if they do not state them outright, no matter if it's good, bad, or flawed, and the motivation to pursue those goals. But a character will not hold much interest or weight in the story or player's journey if there are not some stakes involved. Where if they failed a goal, then what is the impact not just for them, but everyone else that could be affected? One of the biggest aspects of a character to make sure they stand out is what makes them unique. Is it something physical like a habit or skill, or are they smart when it comes to a topic? While the descriptions I'm giving for characters are quite broad and not clearly detailed, leaving things open to imagine what a character can be, but also discuss later when it comes to game examples. The setting is a very broad area of the story, which includes everything from the time, place, and environment. There are a lot of possibilities when developing the setting, but making it clear what is happening even if an exact location and point in time is not given of the world that can be easily interpreted. The setting is a very open part to develop, which also is the largest make or break, where if it's not executed well or in a unique manner compared to other similar worlds, it may be easily forgotten. A world setting should have everything else aligning with it so it feels cohesive and nothing appears to be out of place or not really a part of it. A problem that typically happens is with the logic and consistency of the rules of that world, where something such as a piece of technology defies the logic of what is possible or should be possible and is not consistent with the rest of the technology in that world. Typically, this is a problem with the story in an attempt of stakes and tension if the antagonist has it or attempting to obtain it, but more often will push players out of the story because of it not really fitting into the setting. Making sure the setting is logical and consistent no matter what is introduced is paramount, so it's convincing and further pulls the player into that world. Something that is more commonly mentioned with games, especially in more recent years, is the theming. What are the writers wanting to say through the characters and the world? What message are they wanting to get across to the audience where it should be understood by most paying attention to the story and not just the gameplay? In more recent years, some game themes have felt like they were pushing an agenda, whatever it may be, instead of subtly including it with other themes. A story can have multiple themes, and unless the writers have a very well thought out theme, they can stand out on its own with no support from other supporting themes. But having more of anything can cause themes to become confusing with characters and the world, so it's something that should be carefully considered. If a theme feels to be forced or pushing something that people may not care about, then it will be ignored, with the typical response being that its theming and story are not that good. The plot is the biggest piece that everyone talks about. The plot involves all the characters, setting, and themes, which is truly the make or break, because if it's not enjoyable to the player, then everything else connected will take a massive hit no matter the quality. The plot should have interesting points that can be explored even if it's not a complete mystery, helping lead the player along, which gets them to think about what could be the cause or reason for a character's actions, or why a faction is performing certain actions, being a main plot point of the story. Getting the player to think about the plot and guessing what could be the connecting pieces is typically a good thing, only if it's not confusing or has a twist which throws away what was being established or most of what the player could have guessed. A twist in the plot should not be a rug pull of sorts, completely leaving the player blindsided, where it can upset them because of switching expectations. Every part of the plot should have a purpose, even if it's not unique, which will eventually, if not immediately, will fit together into a larger whole. If part of the plot does not really add anything, such as a theme where it can feel disconnected from the rest of the plot, then players will likely become confused and ignore that theme and plot point. While I have been discussing the overall key parts of world building, I have not brought up the good, the bad, and the mediocre of it. Where to begin when it comes to games and world building? Should it be an RPG, survival and exploration, or adventure game? While these genres have commonalities with potentials such as being narrative driven, open world, or in-depth lore history, all of these options, while good, may miss a point of world building that another may excel at. Role-playing games, or RPGs, are going to provide the most compared to other genres, and a very good example would be The Witcher 3. The Witcher series has always had good world building since the original game, but with each entry only further added onto and improved that overall world building. Not just in the standpoint of more context and content of that world, but also in the quality of the world building. While the developers already had a kind of cheat code for the games because of the books, where other games had to create everything themselves or less to work with when developing a fleshed out world. An immediate thought may have been, why not focus on the first Witcher game instead of the third when it came to world building, because of so much of it being built from the first and second game's foundation. While in some aspects that would be the best call, seeing the scope of each game is the key. The first game was released in 2007, while the second was released in 2011, where most games during these timeframes would have overall decent world building, but the scope was much smaller compared to only a few years later with The Witcher 3 in 2015. The scope was much bigger and detailed compared to the previous games in the series. More often than not, it's a mixed bag with open worlds, where a game has introduced an open world if it's not really necessary. The Witcher 3 does this right because of the detail, depth, and coherence. A lot of other open world games are much more rocky in their execution, typically due to the coherence, where the game allows a player to do everything with no consequences, such as Skyrim allowing players to be a part of most, if not all, major leadership for factions in the game, even though logically it makes no sense. The Witcher 3 does not allow for that type of issue to happen by properly locking out things when the player has done certain actions. But jumping back to the first and second game for a moment on why the third game does a better job at world building is because of its open world, allowing for more depth compared to the linear progression and exploration of the previous two games, where typically the player was not able to revisit a location after they progressed in the story. Linear games are not a bad thing by any means, and can still provide a lot of good world building, but are much more limited compared to an open world, where if it's done right, a player can see a living and breathing world that is outside of them. I will state, as of writing this script, I have not yet played the first or second Witcher games, but have read up on what happened in the first and the possible options of the second due to its branching path method. But even without the full context of those games, I still very much enjoyed The Witcher 3 because it did not overload or confuse the player on what is going on with characters or the world most of the time. One of the first main story points of the game a player will encounter is an interaction with a general asking Geralt about his past actions in the second game. While none of these answers will affect much in the game, can still be confusing because the player may not know the locations and characters, let alone the context. Outside of interactions such as that one, the game allows the player to learn and understand the world with its characters not implying too much from previous games where the player may not understand Geralt's actions. The first main point I had touched on was the world building quality being the investment, and typically it's better to have something smaller which is more refined in comparison to a larger world with less detail. The first and second Witcher games accomplished this and set up the third game to have the opportunity for a better open world with enough detail and depth not to have to compromise on the world building quality. Other games can just start out with an open world with the first game in a potential series, but it will be much harder due to the lack of previous content to flesh out a world. Even without the context of the previous games, I never felt as if any of the locations were just thrown together with little thought or reason, along with conversations due to the war being in the region giving context to some of the locations and why they're in a certain state. The lore of the game is slowly given to the player over the course of the main story, but going out and doing side quests further expands the player's knowledge and understanding of the characters and the world without feeling like a chore. A great example are the monsters that Geralt slays, where it's beneficial to look at the bestiary for any information on weaknesses, aiding in the gameplay, but also organically giving reasons to read about a certain monster, in turn further expanding the player's understanding of the lore. Because the Witcher game's doing a good job at keeping things coherent with the lore of the world and monsters, that allows the player to accept that world's logic and not ignore lore outright. The Witcher 3's intentionality is done well overall from its characters, setting, themes, and plot, but does have some plot holes and inconsistencies with parts of the world and character behaviors or traits. If the player is just going through the third game and/or has not read any of the books, they will likely not notice some of the inconsistencies. For the most part, the main story and the surrounding world with its characters can be understood with no clear problems throughout. What I will bring up are spoilers at various points in the game, so you have been warned. If you are wanting to play the game, then I would recommend skipping to this point in the video. One problem is with Novigrad after some main story events occur, making the city more intensely hunt down any non-humans, which should include Geralt. While he's still considered human for the most part, but due to his mutations can be considered more of a monster, especially due to other people's reactions, even back to the beginning of the game, seeing Witchers as less than human. Because of those types of reactions being common, that should be the mentality of Novigrad, which should either stop Geralt from entering the city altogether, or make it at least much more difficult, where you'd have to sneak around avoiding patrolling groups of non-human hunters. But nothing like that occurs before or after those set of events, leading to a clear plot hole and disconnect from the player in that point. A similar plot hole issue can be found with Dandelion, where Geralt breaks him out of prison in Novigrad and returns to the city, somehow with no legal repercussions happening to Geralt or him. There are several other plot hole and world inconsistencies with The Witcher 3, ranging from smaller problems to more clear, obvious ones, which do not make much sense. While the intentionality for the most part of the game is well done, but due to these more clear problems can leave players disconnected from the world and story, taking it less seriously even with everything else being solid. Another solid RPG game that is well known for its story is Disco Elysium. While the game plays vastly differently compared to The Witcher 3, where the player takes control of a detective attempting to solve a murder through searching for clues and talking to people to piece things together, it does not have any more traditional combat but more of puzzles. Disco Elysium is based off Robert Kurvitz's writing of the overall world called Elysium, with a book released in 2013 involving that world called Sacred and Terrible Air. The game itself was an expansion of what was already developed and making it easier to further grow that world, and even while it has less materials to work with compared to what the Witcher series has, that's not a bad thing. When a game is being adapted from a book and writings of a world already established, instead of being born just for the game, is typically better. Unlike the broader scale of the Witcher series, allows the game to better handle everything that's already established for that world. In comparison with The Witcher 3, Disco Elysium has overall less intentionality problems and not as obvious, but there are still issues. Disco Elysium is an open world where the player can explore wherever they like with no major consequences and time limitations of having to complete certain main story objectives before a deadline. though the player can miss out on small side details or quests, such as missing characters because they are only available up to a certain day, but are not essential to the main story. The player does not need to know the world previously, especially in this case due to it being more of an even niche book compared to the Witcher series. The world of Disco Elysium is vast and detailed from what the player can explore. Immediately upon starting the game, we'll introduce how the world operates and feels towards the player's role. Though a glaring problem arises at the very start of the game, where even though it will be explained why in some aspects and in more detail as the game progresses, of why the main character has complete amnesia. The main character cannot remember anything, not their own name, how they look, occupation, location, where they actually live, and people they may know. This is a game's way of introducing the player to the world without them needing to know anything previously, such as from the book. At least in my opinion, the problem is that it makes no sense why the story even happens with the main character at all. The main character is a police detective investigating a murder with another detective assisting them from another precinct. Why would the other detective, let alone other people, even though it's established at least in the area of the fictional city of Revenal, where police are strongly disliked, allow someone like this to run an investigation into a murder where they show repeatedly they are not mentally sound? There can be a lot of factors of why this may slide in that world, but the only given one is that he is a police officer and he is assigned to it, which is shaky at best. While that is the primary problem with Disco Elysium, and even The Witcher 3 has a slightly similar problem with amnesia, it's not as problematic, and can easily remove the player from the world, causing the investment point for a player to likely fail or become much more difficult to hook them again. Outside of that, even with smaller issues, such as characters being shown to behave in certain manners while they do not consistently follow that line of thinking, the world itself feels natural and a lived-in place, even with all the problems that are encountered, including the main character not feeling out of place. The quality of the world and its intentionality is clear, with it being focused on what it wants to talk about. It focuses on the main character's past of self-reflection and healing, in hand with the world wanting the player to find meaning and beauty in such a broken and chaotic world. With world building, no matter the media of books, comics, TV shows, movies, or video games, it's never easy to introduce and get someone invested into a world and its characters. Not including the quality and intentionality to help with that investment walks a fine line between absurdity and reasonable. With worlds, what matters is if they capture your interest and you can enjoy them no matter the flaws. Thank you again for watching another video of mine. Just doing this in my spare time as a hobby and slowly trying to improve, even if it's just one step at a time, and I hope to see you next time.